17 years old, Eliot Frost knew the bite of damp concrete and the smell of gasoline-soaked air far better than the warmth of any home. Under the shadow of a highway overpass in Seattle, the night pressed against his thin frame, seeping through the frayed seams of a coat that once belonged to his grandfather. The shoulders had worn thin, the stitches were unraveling, yet it still carried the faint trace of engine oil and aftershave scents that whispered of a family he once belonged to. That coat was not fabric, it was memory, and memory was all he had left. Eliot was not only a homeless teenager, he was a boss discarded for telling the truth about himself. The day he came out as gay, his parents turned a house into a stranger's place and his name into a burden they refused to carry. They gave him a trash bag filled with clothes and pushed him out the door as though he were something to be forgotten. That night, he understood with painful clarity how cruel the world could be toward anyone who dared to be different. Yet even in that cruelty, he clung to a fragile belief that kindness, however small, was never wasted. On this particular November night, the neon of a gas station flickered like an exhausted firefly, painting the cracked asphalt with sickly yellow light. Eliot leaned against the cold bricks, stomach hollow, fingers stiff from the chill. The highway hummed above, a reminder that life rushed on for everyone else while he lingered on the margins. Then the silence cracked with the roar of a motorcycle. Not smooth and steady, but stumbling, choking as if it too had been left behind. A massive Harley coasted under the overpass and shuddered to a stop near the buzzing sign. Its chrome no longer gleamed, it seemed as weary as the man who rode it. The rider, broad-shouldered with long gray hair spilling from under his helmet, bent forward as though the weight of years pressed against his spine. He pulled at the ignition, cursed under his breath, and finally lowered his head in defeat. The machine sat lifeless, nothing but steel and silence. Eliot should have slipped deeper into the shadows. He knew well enough that approaching strangers, especially men built like giants, could mean danger. The streets had taught him caution, had carved into him a survival instinct sharper than any blade. But as he watched the man's gloved hands tremble with frustration, another instinct rose stronger, the one his grandfather had nurtured in the quiet evenings of a small garage long ago. He remembered the smell of grease under his nails, the warmth of headlights on their backs, the patience in his grandfather's voice teaching him how to listen, truly listen, to the language of engines. Those memories pressed forward now, pushing him out of hiding and toward the broken Harley. Eliot's voice, though soft, carried into the cold air. Having trouble with the bike. The man lifted his head, surprise flashing in tired eyes. For Eliot, the words were more than a question. They were an offering, a bridge from loneliness toward purpose. In that moment, under the hum of neon and the chill of night, a single choice set itself before him. He could remain invisible, another ghost in the margins of the city, or he could step forward and give it what little he had left: his skill, his compassion, his willingness to help a stranger who looked as broken as he felt. That step, that question, would open the door to a future he never dared to imagine. Because what Eliot could not know as he stood in the harsh glow of the gas station light was that this encounter would not end with fixing a motorcycle. It would fix something far greater. It would spark a chain of events that would carry him out of the shadows, toward belonging, toward the family he thought he had lost forever. Stay with Heart Stories, because Eliot's journey from that cold night is about to unfold into a story of survival, kindness, and the kind of twist that proves hope can roar louder than despair. And perhaps the lesson already begins here when the world strips everything away. Even a single act of courage, even a small decision to help, can turn a night of loneliness into the first step toward light. The man introduced himself as Jake Morrison. His presence filled the dim corner of the Moss Station broad chest beneath a worn leather jacket, weather-creased skin telling of highways crossed and storms endured, long strands of silver hair falling against his shoulders. He looked powerful, but not untouchable. There was exhaustion in the way he sat astride the unmoving Harley, as though life itself had drained the strength from him. When he finally spoke, his words carried the weight of confession. The bike had died on the very night he needed it most. He was supposed to be at his daughter's wedding, a reunion he had waited for after 5 years of silence, guilt, and distance. And now, just miles away from hope, his engine had betrayed him. Eliot listened quietly, the way his grandfather had once told him to listen to the quiet ticking of a cooling motor. The ache in Jake's voice was more than frustration. It was fear of losing a chance to repair something beyond steel and chrome. Eliot crouched down by the motorcycle, his knees pressed to cold asphalt, the night air gnawing at his thin body. His fingers, numb but determined, searched along the machine with a precision born from memory rather than training. The shadows of his grandfather's garage seemed to gather around him in that moment. He remembered calloused hands guiding his own, the steady rhythm of tools clinking against metal, the pride of bringing an engine back to life. Eliot's own hands trembled from hunger and cold, but they moved as if guided by invisible lines. Every twist of a bolt, every check of a cable felt like slipping into a language he still remembered fluently, even after losing everything else. Jake watched in silence, disbelief softening into a cautious hope. He had expected another night of failure, perhaps even missing the only chance to make peace with his daughter. But the boy beside his bike worked with a kind of quiet devotion, ignoring the sting of wind and the grime beneath his nails. And then, suddenly, the silence broke. The Harley coughed, sputtered, then thundered alive with a deep growl that echoed beneath the overpass. The engine roared back into being, its sound reverberating like a promise reclaimed. Jake's eyes widened with something he had not allowed himself in years, relief that bordered on joy. He swung a heavy leg over the seat, feeling the familiar vibration beneath him, a vibration that carried him one step closer to redemption. He pulled out his wallet, thick with bills, and held it toward Eliot. The gesture was natural, almost automatic, but the boy shook his head. He did not flinch, did not glance at the money. Instead, he said simply that what mattered was Jake reaching his daughter. It was not just a statement. For Eliot, abandoned by his own parents for being who he was, it was almost a prayer whispered into the night that no father should fail a child again. The words hung in the air with a power greater than the motorcycle's roar. Jake felt it as clearly as he felt the thrum of the Harley beneath him. He reached out instead to clasp Eliot's hand. Rough palm met trembling fingers, and for an instant the cold night seemed less cruel. Without another word, Jake swung back onto his Harley and gunned the throttle. The machine surged forward, carrying him into the dark toward a ceremony that might heal the wounds of years. Eliot remained by the gas station, the lingering vibration of the motorcycle fading into the highway's hum. He did not realize that he had given away far more than mechanical skill. He had handed a father back to a daughter. He had turned despair into motion again. And in doing so, Eliot unknowingly opened the first door toward his own salvation. Sometimes the smallest refusal to take money, to reduce kindness to a transaction, becomes the most powerful gift. Eliot's choice that night reminded him, and reminds us, that repairing what is broken is not only about engines and machines, it is about courage, empathy, and the invisible threads that can stitch two strangers into something that feels like hope. The first light of morning crept over the edges of the city, washing the world in pale gray. Eliot Frost curled against the hard wall of the gas station, his thin body wrapped tighter inside the threadbare coat that could no longer hold out the cold. He pressed his knees close, trying to quiet the hollow ache gnawing at his stomach. His pocket offered little comfort, only a few coins that clinked together like an insult. Not enough for food, not enough for warmth. He had given away the only chance for money hours earlier. Refusing Jake Morrison's offer, it should have filled him with regret. Yet what Eliot felt most was an emptiness that had nothing to do with hunger, an emptiness that came from being unseen, from living each day as though he were invisible. The world around him carried the fragile stillness of dawn, that in-between moment when even the restless streets seemed to hold their breath. Eliot closed his eyes, trying to will away the chill. When it came the sound, at first only a murmur, low and distant, like thunder stirring in the mountains. Then louder, closer, multiplying. One engine became many, and the air trembled with a vibration so deep it seemed to rise from the ground itself. Eliot lifted his head. The horizon shimmered with the silhouettes of motorcycles cutting through the morning mist. Not one, not 10, but a rolling tide of chrome and steel. Their headlights blazing, their engines pounding like war drums. The sound swallowed everything: the whisper of wind, the buzzing neon, even the noise of the highway overhead. The world had become a symphony of thunder. He stumbled to his feet, heart racing in terror. The patches on their jackets came into view, black leather stamped with skulls and wings, the unmistakable insignia of the Hells Angels. Every story he had ever overheard about them returned at once: ruthless men who ruled highways with fists and fear, the kind of figures people crossed the street to avoid. And now they filled the gas station lot, engines growling as if the earth itself were alive. Eliot's chest tightened. He was certain his end had come. Then from the center of the formation, one rider cut through, pulling off his helmet with steady hands. Silver hair spilled out, catching the dawn light. Jake Morrison, the man he had helped just hours ago, now stood tall in a jacket heavy with badges and patches, marks of honor earned through years of loyalty and battle on the road. His gaze found Eliot instantly. Jake dismounted, his boots striking the pavement with a weight that commanded silence, even from the roar of so many engines. He crossed the distance and, without hesitation, wrapped Eliot in a fierce embrace. The boy's thin frame seemed almost swallowed by Jake's arms, but the grip was steady, protective. His voice carried across the gathering like a command that brooked no doubt. "This," Jake declared, his tone booming above the hum of engines, "is the one who kept me from missing the most important day of my life." The effect was immediate. The sea of leather and steel shifted, rough faces turning toward the fragile figure still trembling in Jake's hold. For the first time in years, Eliot was not stared at as an outcast, not dismissed as a shadow on the streets. He was being seen as a savior, as someone who mattered. Tears stung his eyes, though he tried to hide them. For so long he had believed that being different meant being unwanted. Yet here he was, held before men feared across the country, not as a victim, but as someone worthy of respect. The engines quieted slowly, their thunder fading into a steady hum. And in that hum was something Eliot had never known: belonging. When the world has taught you only to expect rejection, recognition feels like fire in frozen veins. Eliot's morning began in hunger and despair, but within the roar of 100 motorcycles, he discovered the power of acknowledgement. Sometimes what saves us is not money, not even food, but the simple truth of being seen, of having another human being say before the world, "You matter." The gas station lot, once a place of shadows and hunger, had transformed into something Eliot Frost could barely comprehend. Where he expected violence, there was instead a slow unfolding of generosity. The men dismounted from their Harleys, heavy boots striking the pavement, their faces weathered by sun and road, their hands scarred from years of gripping steel and throttle. Yet those same hands reached into saddlebags and jackets, offering what they carried. One placed a loaf of bread into Eliot's shaking arm. Another draped a thick flannel shirt across his shoulders. Crumpled bills were pressed into his palms with gruff nods, as if the act needed no words. The gestures were simple, but to Eliot, they were overwhelming. Each offering chipped away at the loneliness he had worn like armor. These men, who lived by a reputation that made others tremble, were calling him brother. The words sounded strange to his ears, almost foreign. He had been cast out by the very people meant to love him. Yet here, among strangers marked with skulls and fire, he was claimed as kin. Jake Morrison stood a little apart, watching with an expression that blended pride and recognition. When the last engine finally cooled and the air smelled of gasoline and morning mist, he stepped forward. In his hand was a small, weathered card, the edges softened from years of being carried. He extended it toward Eliot. The boy accepted it carefully, as though it were something fragile. On one side, faded print revealed the details of a garage in Sacramento. Jake's voice, low and steady, carried authority but also something softer, an invitation. He told Eliot that he needed someone who could hear engines the way others hear music, someone who understood machines with their hands and their heart. He said Eliot had that gift. If the boy ever wanted a place to work, to build, to belong, that garage door would be open to him. Eliot's throat tightened as he held the card. The cold night, the gnawing hunger, the endless rejection, all of it seemed to recede as the weight of the card settled into his hand. It was not just the promise of a job. It was a declaration that he was worth trusting, that his hands carried value, that his identity did not erase his ability to be seen, respected, and needed. The Hells Angels lingered a while longer, surrounding him not as predators, but as guardians. They laughed, passed cigarettes between them, shared stories that rumbled like their engines. And all the while, Eliot stood in their circle, no longer an invisible boy pressed against cold walls, but part of something larger, something that carried him. When at last engines rumbled back to life and the lot began to clear, Eliot remained with the card clenched in his fist. The flannel shirt warmed his shoulders, the bread filled the emptiness in his stomach, and the word brother still echoed in his ears. In life, acceptance can arrive from the most unlikely places. For Eliot, it came not from the parents who abandoned him, but from men who were feared and misunderstood. It was a reminder that family is not always tied by blood, and worth is not erased by rejection. Sometimes belonging is found in unexpected circles among those who see strength where the world saw only weakness. The engines thundered back to life one by one, the sound rolling across the horizon until the pack of Harleys melted into the distance. Dawn had fully broken, light spilling over the cracked asphalt, gilding the gas station in soft gold. Eliot Frost stood motionless, his thin fingers wrapped tightly around the card Jake Morrison had pressed into his hand. It felt heavier than its paperweight should allow, as though it carried not only an address, but the weight of possibility itself. Eliot turned the card slowly. On the back, written in uneven, almost trembling script, was a message. His eyes moved carefully across the words, "My daughter wants to meet you. She runs a shelter and resource center for LGBT youth who've been cast out. If you need a roof, her door's always open." The words blurred as his vision swam. His breath caught in his throat, and for a moment he could not move. The night before, he had been just another boy hiding from the cold, clinging to scraps of memory in a world that had made it clear he was unwanted. Yet here, in his hand, was proof that his kindness had rippled outward into something greater. In helping Jake reach his daughter, Eliot had unknowingly opened a path to a new kind of family, one that understood him, accepted him, and welcomed him as he was. He lifted his face to the sky. The clouds that had hung heavy all night were parting now, split by a seam of sunlight that bathed his worn features in warmth. The world, for once, did not feel so hostile. With each breath, his chest filled not with fear, but with fragile hope. The coat he wore, once only a relic of memory, now seemed like a bridge carrying the scent of his past, but also guiding him towards something beyond survival. Eliot stepped away from the wall where he had spent countless hours crouched in defeat. His stride was still tentative, but no longer the shuffle of someone broken. He moved with the awareness that the card in his hand was more than paper. It was an invitation to reclaim the belonging that had been denied to him. A mishwiyu, a roof, a community, perhaps even a home. The boy who had believed kindness was useless now carried living proof that it could return in ways unimaginable. A single act kneeling in the cold to fix a stranger's motorcycle had echoed back as an offer of safety, family, and acceptance. The morning highway hummed as cars passed by, but for the first time in years, Eliot did not feel like the world was rushing past him. He felt as though he had been invited to join it. In every life, there are moments when one decision alters the path ahead. For Eliot, it was the choice to step out of the shadows and offer help when he had nothing to give but his hands and his heart. That choice became the key that unlocked a door to love, community, and the truth that no one is ever truly alone if they dare to keep believing. What about you? Do you believe a single act of kindness has the power to change a life, even when the world seems unforgiving? Share your thoughts in the comments. We'd love to hear your stories. If Eliot's journey touched you, don't forget to subscribe to Heart Stories for more powerful tales of resilience, healing, and the unexpected twists that remind us why hope still matters.